Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you're watching or listening to this, and welcome to Link Up Leaders, your direct link to leaders in supply chain and e-commerce. My name is Lisa Kinski. I'm your producer and co-host, and joined as always by Francois Jeffrey. Francois, how are you doing this morning?
I am doing great. It's nice and cold. How are you?
I am good. I have coffee during the week for the first time in, well, that's a lie. I did it in Miami, but coffee during the week at home for the first time in like a month. So quickly go off the rails. Fair
Good for
warning.
you. There you go. I know when I was at Powwow, when we were at Powwow a few weeks ago,
Oh my God.
four cups of coffee was a little bit too much for me, I think.
Yeah.
I built a bad habit that morning, and I think, it's psychological. My buddy goes, I usually have about 2 cups in the morning. And I'm like, all right, if he has a cup, I'll have a cup. And then he had a
Yeah.
cup and he downed that cup. What I didn't realize, he also fills his cup with ice. And then so it's not as much coffee. So he has 2 cups of iced
Oh,
coffee, which is not as much coffee as what I drink. So then I
yeah.
had those 2 cups, and then we had the cup at breakfast, and then I had a cup at the Amazon powwow and stuff. So it just added up.
Yeah.
And it was not my mushroom coffee,
No,
which
it
pissed me off,
wasn't.
but it
I mean, your mushroom stuff comes in like little packets. You probably could have brought some with you if you wanted to, right? Like it's like an
well,
instant coffee thing?
yeah, so they have the brew, again, shout out to Four Sigmatic. They have the brewed one that is a drip coffee,
Uh-huh.
and that's the one that I usually will make like a pot of when I'm in Pittsburgh, and I'll leave that
Okay.
and drink that throughout the day. But yeah, I also just ordered the instant packs, which is amazing too. That does taste more like mushrooms than the ground coffee, I would say.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so it definitely, like, you could taste. I don't even know what type of mushrooms, but they sent me like a nice little variety pack with the bundle. So we shall see. I tried a different one this morning,
Mhm.
but I feel good. I love this coffee.
Good. If they gave you one of the little chai teas in there, I wanna try that, or a chai latte, whatever it was called.
They
I
did
wanna
not.
steal one of those. Oh, dang.
It was all regular coffee, but they had different types of mushrooms, so they do it for different
Got it.
reasons. So like one is just standard coffee, one is like a balance, and one is for to build your immune system. I don't know what exactly it has. I think it
Yeah.
might be psychological. But it is what it is. It makes me happy.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll have to try that stuff. Just doing the regular QT this morning,
Yeah.
but I'm with you. There's something to like when you have a cup of coffee with somebody. There's like a very social aspect to it. Like
Yeah.
if ever I'm at my friend Emma's house, at Emma and Kurt's place, I always have coffee with them in the mornings. She doesn't even drink coffee, but the Keurig is there, and I have my own designated mug there. So I'm like, oh, I have to use my mug because you know how I am about my mugs.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, so and another thing about Four Sigmatic, I mean, they hit me at just the right times
Mhm.
in regards to like marketing to me. So they will like text me at exactly when they know that I'm running out of coffee. They
Mhm.
will send me email offers and all these different, I guess, touch points, which 100% has to do with what we're talking about today, because I know that they're gathering all this data on me, and I'm
Mhm.
okay with it because I actually enjoy it. So-
But you like it when you benefit and enjoy the product, but then the second you don't want the product, probably don't love the data collection.
Yes, I will
'Cause
text
I'm the
them
same
opt
way.
out or whatever I have to, or no, I don't know. Sometimes they don't tell me what I have to text back. And so I'll just text back a bunch of like capital no, capital opt out.
Oh, they don't
Uh,
give you I think that's actually against CAN spam.
I know. I don't know which one does it. I'll have to look at my phone later. But it's not Four
Oh,
Sigmatic. They do a good job over
okay. Well,
there.
again, not sponsored by Four Sigmatic, but it
Not
could be.
sponsored by Four Sigmatic, just my favorite coffee.
But like you said, today's conversation is going to be all about data and the analytics and how e-commerce businesses can use it to benefit their business. I will say our segues are getting better, and I'm very happy
They
with
are getting better.
that. So today we have with us the CEO of 5X, Tarush Aggarwal, and he is calling in from Colombia. Tarush, how are you doing?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me on the show and just listening to your conversation about coffee. I've never had some, so I've never tried coffee.
You've
You're in
never had
Colombia.
coffee. You're in Colombia.
I'm in Colombia, and I've tried it once in my life, and I was bouncing over every wall, and that was the end of my coffee journey.
Gotcha. Well, you may like this mushroom stuff that Francois
Yeah.
drinks, because isn't it
Four
lower
Sigmatic, look it up.
caffeine?
It's less
Yeah.
caffeine, much less caffeine.
I love Four Sigmatic. I've been using their mushroom blend. I used it for a long time. It's a fantastic product, and good to know that they do data collection the right way and are able to sort of get you engaged.
Yeah. I mean, if they don't use your company yet, you should definitely reach out to them, because I know there's a few ways they could definitely target me a little bit more, but they do a good job so far.
You have become a true brand ambassador for them. I think they've done their job pretty
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. I mean, it's they built up a great brand.
And that's what it's about. Well, Tarush, thank you so much for being here. Why don't you give us a little bit of information about your background, and you just I don't know if we can talk about I didn't ask this ahead of time, like your recent travels and what kind of came of those, but
Sure.
we'd love to hear about that news if you're able to talk about it.
Yeah, totally. Sort of. Please feel free to stop me if I'm going too long. But yeah, my background's in tech. I grew up in India. Very typical computer science. Came to America, and I ended up as a software engineer at Salesforce.com back in 2011, and just realized very quickly on that software engineering was not my cup of tea. A lot of really smart people there, but I had no interest in kind of working on a small feature, sort of siloed. And at that point, no one in the valley, no one was really talking about data. And I had this opportunity to work with the product manager at Salesforce, and we built one of the first sort of data products at Salesforce. And since then, haven't really looked back. Spent the last 10 years. Most recently, I was at Wework. Early on, helped scale the data team from 2 to 100. And got this opportunity to move to China and focus on the machine learning and the sort of data platform in China, which is a huge opportunity. And long story short, at the beginning of COVID, I found myself on day one of COVID on a 10-day vacation to Bali. And that was the first day they started wearing masks in Shanghai. And I was like, what's happening over here? And I flew to Bali, and 2 days later, China's locked up, and flew with a small handbag. And that was the end of that chapter, and got to really spend 2 years in Bali. And since then, I sort of started this company 5X, and now sort of get to travel to different parts of the world, spend a few months over there, but sort of Bali's always going to be home.
Gotcha. That's crazy that you just went on a vacation and then you ended up being there for about 2 years, you said. That's nuts, with a small handbag. I pack for a weekend like I'm moving. I don't know how you did it.
I was living off a small suitcase for 6 months, and then finally at some point I gave up my lease in Shanghai, and they packed up my bag and shipped it over to Bali. And when my whole apartment moved over, I had no idea what to do with it. Like, it's so intimidating to think of living anywhere with a small bag for some time, but once you get used to it, and sort of granted, it's not Pittsburgh or Atlanta, it's Bali. It's the same weather throughout the year. You need beach shorts, flip-flops, and like 2 t-shirts, right? So it was an easier experience, but it's super hard to go live in New York or go live in San Francisco after you live in Bali for 2 years. So I guess the one downside is I don't think I can ever live in New York ever again.
It's probably too cold.
Exactly. I was actually just there last week, and it was freezing. So I'm super happy to be back in sort of sunny Colombia.
Yes.
Very jealous of your travels. Now, when you were mentioning software engineering and not wanting to be stuck in these silos, I guess, what is it that you brought up? And we don't have to get into specifics, but what is it about data that really piqued your interest, let's say at Salesforce and even like at Wework? I think this mindset of data and being data first and data led, or maybe even data driven, which we could also dive into the differences between being data driven and data led. I guess what piqued your interest just in data?
Oh no, looks like I lost you guys for a second. Let's wait for it to come back.
I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay.
I heard the any chance you could repeat that question? I think what I heard is what got you interested in data at Salesforce and later at Wework.
Right.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think for me, what really fascinated me was data was a 30,000 foot overview of the entire business. And especially as, big tech sort of started to get more and more mainstream, there was this need to, look at the 30,000 foot overview and kind of figure out what are the top company priorities and what can we do to enable these companies. And it was very much at its infancy. And what I loved about it back then was that the playbooks of how to do data hadn't yet been written, which was just a huge opportunity for anyone kind of entering at that point. And when I joined Salesforce at that point, the data engineering, data science, none of these careers, existed. And sort of when I left 4 years ago, at that time, we were starting to see the rise of data engineering, of data science, and it was just such a super exciting time to sort of enter the space. And many years ago, when I was at Wework, we were seeing some of the same playbooks of, Wework wanted to be a data-driven company to figure out its go-to-market strategy, to basically look at its spaces as giant robots with sensors and all of this. The only difference at that point was, the data infrastructure, the data landscape was a lot more mature. So it was, much more exciting to be able to do it at the Wework time when, sort of compared to many years before that at Salesforce.
And when we're talking data, are we talking operational data? Are we talking sales data?
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned, for example, to put together their go-to-market strategy. You would think a company like Wework at that time would already have a go-to-market strategy.
Yeah. No, I think data is a way to enable the business, right? And business have different priorities in different departments. Now, typically, you use data to add more visibility into your go-to-market strategy, where your customers coming from, which campaigns you focus on more, which ones need to be deprecated. On the product side, how are customers using your products? Who are your different segments? How can you tailor a custom experience to your different segments? Like, I love what Four Sigmatic is doing with you, because they're starting to understand when, based on your data, you're finishing your sort of stock which you have, and they're able to sort of target you at the right time, right? That's that's a super sort of compelling use case, which is sort of backed by data. So they go to market strategies, obviously, prevent churn, build repeat customers, and you see data fit in over there in order to enable those sort of various departments. So, from a sort of go-to-market strategy, from a sort of product strategy, but also from like finance, right? What are your accounts receivable? What are your most active customers? Being able to automate different parts of the business is the sort of promise which sort of data brings. And if you, to sort of go one step further, 10 years ago, no one was doing digital marketing, right? Like, and Google came along and said, if you don't do this now, 10 years from now, you'll find it really difficult to succeed. And all of a sudden, every company's got, a full-time digital marketer. They focus on brand, they focus on what customers are saying. And the companies that didn't do it no longer can compete today. You haven't heard of them. That same thing is happening in the data space, where if you're not starting to think about data in terms of adding visibility into go market and figuring out how customers are using your product, engagement, retention, churn, all of these different metrics, in the next 10 years, you just won't be able to compete, because all of your competition will be doing it, and they'll just be able to out execute you. So, your actual product is still is obviously extremely fundamental. But if you don't have data to back up your product and, to help you reach out to your customers and figure out who your customers are and to better target them, then it becomes a really uphill battle just having an amazing product.
That's kind of intimidating for a new business, isn't it? Like because all this data is available, and then it's like, okay, what do I do with it? Like, how can I apply this to learn more about my customers? Like, okay, Francois has taken all these actions. What do we do with this? Like with what he's purchased and how frequently, and things like that. I mean, that just sounds like such a behemoth to take on for any small business, especially these new small e-commerce businesses. I mean, where should they start with kind of this data collection and aggregating and applying to their business? Should they do it on their own? Should they go straight to an agency? Are there tools? I mean, what do you recommend?
Sure. So that's a great question, right? Like, when is the right time to invest in the journey? And what we see is that if you're just starting out, it makes a lot of sense to use one of the free tools, right? If you're using Facebook Ads Insight gives you a lot of great insights on your ROI on your Facebook spend. And for a long time, these make sense. So sort of when you start, use the free stuff out there. But you get to this point where the business becomes bigger, right? You start doing a few $1 million in sort of revenue. All of a sudden, you have different sources of data. You have Facebook ads and LinkedIn ads, and you're doing amazing podcasts, and you're doing a little bit of influencer marketing. And all of a sudden, at that point, those tools no longer make sense, right? You need to be able to answer extremely holistic questions across all of my different ad spend. Which one is giving me the best ROI? If you go away from like Google Analytics and want to go one level deeper, who are the different segments of my audience based on how much they've spent, based on how long they've been with me? And once you get to that point where the free tools no longer serve you, that's when you really want to start getting a little bit more sophisticated. So does that make sense?
Oh, definitely. I think a point that may be difficult too is like to determine when you've outgrown those free tools, because this is something that I think we've seen, in conversations again and again, where these small business owners, e-commerce or not, get so used to being solopreneurs or small team entrepreneurs that they're like, well, we've got all our ducks kind of maybe not in a row, but like all in the same group, and it's fine. What we're doing works.
We're making
it's
money.
Fine. We're making money.
Exactly.
It's okay. So you had mentioned something there about a number, a monetary value that maybe once you hit, you should expand. But what are some of the other signs, or I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but what are some of the other things that they should look for to tell them, okay, maybe you've outgrown this free tool, maybe you need some greater capabilities?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and there's no right or wrong answer, but on an intuitive level, when you start asking questions, every business is asking questions every day, right? We had this sort of one sort of product return. How many of those customers ever ordered from us again, right? A very typical question an e-commerce company wants to figure out. When these questions start becoming really, really difficult for you to answer with your own tools, is the time when you need to start thinking about the next step. And historically, that jump between those free tools and the next step has been so intimidating, because the free tools kind of bundle it all for you, right? As long as you're using Facebook, it can give you pretty good insights. But all of a sudden, when you decide to move away from that, you now have to take your data from all of these different data sources, ingest it into a central warehouse, sort of figure out how to clean it, model it, structure it, and then ultimately build reports which power your different teams in your business. And that takes hiring multiple heads and buying infrastructure, and the sort of jump between using free tools and doing it yourself has been so high that historically industries like e-commerce just have shied away from it, right? They've used free tools way longer than you have to. And one of the things which starts to happen as data becomes more mainstream is there are companies which are going to help make the data stack more manageable, be able to help you integrate your data from your different data sources, put it inside a central place. And as more and more of these tools come, the buy-in becomes easier and easier, and sort of 5X plays in that space where we're able to, instead of you going and building your own stack to figure out how to collect data, ingest it, store it, model it, report it, we help you bundle it together and give it to you as a service. And we're going to start seeing more and more of these aggregators and these sort of one-stop shops, which sort of make it easier. So we are gonna, we're already seeing a lot a lot more million, $2 million, $3 million e-commerce stores which are sort of doing this. Whereas 2 years ago, if you wanted to do it, you would need to spend $500,000 hiring 2 or 3 engineers and going and doing it yourself. So I think it's sort of a super exciting time to do it, and we're already starting to see the trends where more and more e-commerce companies are doing it. So it becomes even more important for the ones who aren't doing it, who are at that size, to start thinking about how data is going to power the sort of next generation of like go-to-market of high-level business metrics.
Oh yeah, I mean they've got to keep innovating. Like sales always be selling, business always be innovating. That's the only way to keep up.
Now, you mentioned, for example, the hiring aspect a few times. I think one thing that Salesforce, Wework, all of these companies that have a lot of capital behind them are able to do is, let's say they have a talent acquisition or they have VP of people that can help them hire and they know who to hire. But I think in e-commerce, with it being so a very, I wouldn't say it's not mature, but it's still in the state of maturing, right? Mm-hmm. What is the one key role that you would suggest that they hire if they don't have that data hat, right? A lot of times they might have a visionary that says, hey, these are the types of products and this is how we're going to build it. I'm really good at marketing. I'm really good at bringing people in. But bringing that to the next level of, data acquisition and data analytics, what is that key role that they should be hiring out for?
That's a great question. I think a lot of companies look at a data analyst as that function, right? And a data analyst can go in, pull data from your different data sources and produce reports for you. Now, if you look at it, and very often that's the right answer for a lot of the companies because it gives you a long leeway before the data analyst starts to experience bottlenecks, right? So the first question I would ask myself is, Wework was looking extremely long term. It was no longer about, hey, what do we need to do for the next 6 months? But it was more holistically, where are we going to be 2 or 3 years from now? And when you move from having 10, 20, 30 offices to all of a sudden having 200, that's when you realize that data analyst, a manual way of pulling data and building reports is no longer going to serve you. So, I think the short answer to your question is going into some of those e-commerce companies and figuring out, are you looking to grow 50% year on year? In that case, sort of starting off with a business-focused data analyst who probably has experience in the e-commerce space makes a lot of sense. But if you're really looking to go grab market share, if you're looking to be one of the biggest, one of the leaders in your industry, if we're looking to do something like for Sigmatic, for instance, who's doing with the way it's been able to provide you an extremely good customer experience, then you need to get a little bit more holistic than that. Then at that point, you need to think about what's the infrastructure which we need. What are, sort of data analysts could fit into that infrastructure, but the data engineering piece, the data science piece. And again, that jump has historically been so high, so very few companies have done it. But now that you have, more and more tools, which can, what sort of 5X does, which is, manage the entire data stack for you, and all of a sudden, be able to provide you with engineers who then come into your business to be able to then sort of focus on what is your business use case and how do we translate that all the way from the engineering collection reporting pieces all the way sort of holistically. And we're starting to see more and more products around decision making, which help you take all of this data and actually answer pretty non-trivial questions around it. We'll see more and more very specialized applications purely on top of the e-commerce stack, right? So integrate with Shopify, integrate with Stripe, or integrate with Zendesk, all of the common sort of data sources which e-commerce will be focused on, and be able to provide you pretty good kind of analytics on top of that. So, there'll be a few different solutions, and the sort of 3 solutions which I spoke about is, either sort of hiring an analyst and kind of doing it for yourself. It's not going to be a long-term solution. They're still manually pulling data from different data sources. You don't get to, self-service reporting where anyone in the business can answer any questions and they can answer it for themselves, right? Which is how tech companies look at building products. And that's how Amazon can scale to 15,000 employees in tech, because every employee can now slice and dice data in every way. So the sort of lowest tier option would be look at someone like a data analyst. A tier 2 option could be, what are some of these applications in the e-commerce space which allow you to pull data from your different data sources and start to answer more holistic questions. And then you're going to see the sort of top of the funnel, which is going to become more and more and more sort of prevalent, which is, hey, we want to have the right infrastructure. We want to be able to answer our own holistic questions, not get, a prefabricated template, which sort of layer 2, which is sort of application on top of Spotify, on top of Shopify, on top of Zendesk, on top of Stripe, Square, sort of gives you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great answer, but I think it also sparked another question as to, like, in data, there's a lot of signals and there's a lot of noise, right? And I think it's very hard to get through the noise to find the right signals. And you can even use data to just validate your question because you want it to validate your question, right?
Yeah.
But it might not be the right answer. Fundamentally, how does a company that's scaling and growing work past this? How do they, I guess, determine what data is necessary to get to their next level, to continue growing?
Yeah, that's I think everyone uses data subconsciously, right? Like, whether you're a sort of tiny company, you're looking at a report which your warehouse provider gave you, or you're looking at your number of orders. Now, a lot of people think that when they get data driven, all of a sudden they move from that to having extremely sophisticated models and machine learning and all of this stuff. In reality, it doesn't work that way, right? Information leads to asking better questions. So the sort of questions that you have always lead to asking better questions. And once you start asking those better questions, that changes the way you look at your business. And the sort of problem often is when companies want to ask those better questions, they don't have a good way of doing it. So as long as you're on this trajectory that, as your business is starting to ask better questions, you have the right tooling in place to be able to give your business the capabilities of answering those questions. And as long as that process, which is very organic, continues, very often you'll ask a question, very often we'll use data and come up with a hypothesis. And now we need to have better data to validate that hypothesis. Once you validate that, you can very often realize you're going on the wrong path. And that is when you're going to course correct and naturally move in the right direction. Now, you can partner with, some agencies, or you can use some of these tools which give you prefabricated analysis. And that might be able to accelerate some of your timelines because you start getting better view on your data, and you'll be able to start answering your questions quicker and eventually moving in the right direction. But there's no generic e-commerce playbook, and there's no generic way every single e-commerce company should look at the business. There are some core metrics, how much you sell, how happy your customers, what's your churn rate, how are you doing on the supply chain of things, and those can be higher level metrics. But the sort of strategy piece and coming up with their own hypothesis comes from the go-to-market side. How are you being able to scale this up? What strategy worked for you? And if you just copy the strategy of someone else, you're never going to emerge as the sort of market leader in that space, right? You're always sort of running a step behind.
So I want to back something up really quick, and this is just purely self-serving because I don't know the difference. What is the difference between being data-driven and data-led?
Yeah, there's a super elaborate graph between the super sort of table between being data-driven, being data-led, and it's got different connotations for different industries, but a very practical way to kind of look at it is, most companies probably use data to validate what they're thinking. And that's not really using it. It's like, hey, I think this did well. Hey, data analyst, can you prove this went and did well, right? And, the thing with data is you can either use it to prove or you can use it to learn. And as long as you're using it to prove, you can zoom in, zoom out on any different lens and always validate your hypothesis, right? So at the very, very beginning, we tend to use data to prove things, because that's, we rely on intuition and we use data to be like, I'm pretty sure this is right, can you go prove it, right? And I think if the main point out of this whole talk around data is moving away from that, right? Using data to actually learn from, which is being able to take a step back and saying, here's a hypothesis which I have. Can we actually look at the data to validate if it is taking us, if this hypothesis is actually correct? And then having the awareness, if it's not, to actually course correct, right? And that kind of is the sort of second level, which is more on the data reporting side, more around coming up with your metrics and then using that to actually make sure that you're heading in the right direction. And then finally, at the third layer is when you're more sophisticated, when you are able to come up with, when you're able to optimize your business based on what the numbers are telling you, right? At that point, you're getting more than just reporting, but you're actually getting proactive insights into, hey, this go-to-market strategy, even before you can really see it, is actually something we should really invest in, right? Like the sort of growth trend on this strategy made a lot more sense. Or based on understanding your different segments, sort of starting to understand that you have a segment which is growing extremely quickly, and this segment is interested in a particular type of product, and being able to use insights and recommendations to be able to sort of double down on those areas. So it starts off with very much sort of using it to prove, sort of using it to learn, and then using it to really optimize and start to drive different parts of your business.
Gotcha. So being data led sounds like the better way to succeed. to like
I'm not really sure which one. I forgot the sort of technical limbo of which one's what, but is data driven or data led better? They both sound pretty good. So I don't know what's kind of phase 2 and kind of what's phase 3.
I heard it. I forgot. I need to look it up after this, but I heard in a talk, it might have been actually Eric Ries doing the lean startup at Stanford when he was doing lectures on it. And he was talking about being data driven, where it is very much that just proving your hypothesis, just using this, zooming in, zooming out to whatever it is you exactly want. Whereas being data led, it is like, hey, what is the next question that we can come up with to validate our next value hypothesis? Okay, we know that we're selling products, but who are we selling this to? And how can we target them better? Who's working, who's not working? That's sort of my understanding of data driven versus data led. And I think it was Eric Ries. And we're reading the lean startup here as a team. That's why it's also top of mind for me.
So fresh.
Amazing. I read that book many, many, many years ago, but it's a good time for a refresher. And what you said makes a lot of sense, right? Sort of data led is when you're using data to actually help you optimize different parts of the business. So that intuitively makes sense. I hope we're right.
Yeah, I hope I'm right too.
Yeah, it sounds right. And I think it's funny that you brought up lean startup, Francois, because I was going to bring it up earlier and I was like, no, we've been talking about it every episode. But when Tarush was talking about asking questions, I was like, oh, that's like in the lean startup when he says it's 5 whys. Like you're supposed to like 5-year-old ask like why to every single, answer that you get. It's like, why is the sky blue? Kid, I don't know. But it's like, why didn't this work out? Okay, why did this part break down? It's funny how applicable that book is coming to be.
Well, particularly with data, right? Because within those 5 whys, if you can use those to answer all of your questions and come up with that best question of just like, hey, how can we grow? Right? That's ultimately what it boils down to. But what can support all of that? What can, it sounds like, mitigate a lot of those risks with the growth, and using data to validate that is vital. Now, when companies because there's always this concept of also the chicken or the egg, building, whether it's a new product line or building, if you're a SaaS, building a new product in general. It's knowing, what you want to build, what you think people might like, but not having the data to back it up quite yet. Right. Now, when a company, whether they're e-commerce or SaaS or really any other company, is at this sort of tipping point of deciding on building a product or not, what sort of conversation should they be having around just data in general and what they should be collecting? Is it all just like, hey, can we just validate this?
Yeah. That's always the $1 million question, right? And I think if you look at it from, an XY business school kind of graph, right? On one hand, it's super data driven. I want to have a metric and I want to validate and I want to plan everything, right? And the other end of that is, a founder working purely from intuition, sort of purely based on hunches and facts, and going down that route. And I think as human beings, we all tend to lie on either side of that, right? We're either extremely organized, planned, numbers driven, or we're extremely intuition, sort of, let's go with that. I think on a macro sense is having the awareness to figure out which scale you lie on and going a little bit more towards the middle way. If you tend to always want to see numbers and facts and plan, you're never going to go launch anything because you're always trying to get signs before, and it requires taking that leap of faith and using data, right? And very often for the founder who's extremely intuitive, what's going to serve them more is being a little bit more practical on, hey, before you go spend $5 million building something, can we do a smaller MVP and can we actually validate it before going down that hole, right? So I don't think I kind of fully answered your question, but I think what would serve people more is finding out where they lie on either side and trying to follow more of the middle way. It's easy to be on the extremes, and once we're on the extremes, we tend to just go more on the extremes. And I think using data, numbers, and insights and recommendations are amazing tools, but they don't take away from raw intuition of raw, here's where we want to go based on me as a human being having some intuition, some intuitive feel of where to go, right? If we were there yet, then numbers and systems would just always do it better than human beings. And when we're not there, and I don't think we ever will be, there's always the balance of both.
Yeah, they sort of have to live in this perfect harmony. And once you could achieve that, it's that equilibrium, I guess. That's really where you could grow. That's where you could have fun, and you don't have to worry about the greatest risk of failure, right? Because you're constantly failing no matter what. Now, when it comes to oh shit, I just lost my train of thought. What was I going to ask? Thing. Yeah. Oh, actually, I was going to mention, it's funny that you mentioned this sort of visionary, which is very, sort of laissez-faire. They just know where they want to go and they just have to get there, just do it. And then this sort of, it's from the book EOS. It's an EOS methodology from Gino Wickman that talks about an integrator and visionary, and I brought it up a few times on the podcast as well. Lisa will read it also. But they do have that a test essentially that in the book even. It's called Rocket Fuel, where you can test whether you're more of a visionary or an integrator, if you're more practical or if you're more of a dreamer, right? I think that would be a great book. So you did absolutely answer my question in regards to, where should you start? And I think a solution to that is trying to be more of that centrist, realizing where you lack a lot of those skills and hiring out if you could. If not, just being aware, right? Maybe writing it on the board. Hey, reminder, I have to look at the data for XYZ to validate this question. Makes sense. Makes absolute sense. Now, as you're, let's say, transitioning, because a lot of brands I think we've seen over the past few years that have started on Amazon, and even brands that we see in major Super Bowl commercials today, are transitioning to be more platform agnostic and work on things like Shopify or build their own WooCommerce store because they do have so many product lines or new partnerships. How can they start to think about customer data in a non-Amazon way? I don't know if you work with any companies that have been able to do that successfully yet.
Yeah, that's so in the macro, what's happened in the last 5 years especially is we are using more tools and more platforms than ever before. Many years ago, you would use Google for every single thing, and you would use Facebook only for ads. Whereas now we want to use Zoom for video and Slack for like texting, and we have Facebook ads and ads from like different sort of platforms, and we no longer want Salesforce's help desk software, we want Zendesk. So your average startup today has got between 10 to 12 different sources of data. And that's exponentially more than we had many years ago. So we're seeing this macro trend on the need to centralize data. So being able to pull it from different data sources and ingest it into a central place. And that allows us to answer extremely holistic questions across different data sets. And that's something, these tools, these sort of free tools, don't do a very good job at, because they only kind of work with a few of these different sources. So, for those companies at that point now, which might have started on Amazon or they might have started on Shopify and are now looking at a multi-channel approach, the most important thing is going to be to graduate from just using that platform's analytics and being able to holistically ingest your data into a central place, which then gives you the capability of answering kind of more holistic questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I mean, it just sort of leads into use cases, right? And sort of what, and you touched on it a little bit earlier, or at least you mentioned it. What sort of use cases should they be focusing on as they sort of transition away from these free tools?
So I think, there are three kind of areas, right? So one of them is on like go-to-market strategy. What are you doing to gain more customers, right? On the sort of marketing side, are you doing ads? Are you doing sort of partnerships, sort of collaborations, all of these different things? The first thing data is doing is giving you more insight into what's working, what's not working, what should you do more of, and what should you do sort of less of, right? So most companies, when we look at it, they sort of very holistically begin with go-to-market strategy. The other big area sort of starts to come from retention, engagement, customer lifetime value, right? Understanding what are the different segments of users using your products. An experience of a first-time buyer should be extremely different from someone who buys monthly, and that's extremely different from someone who has bought from you but now is no longer buying from you. And how you target each of these people, what is your messaging around them, all of this comes from having this visibility into who are your different segments, what's the lifetime value for each segment, what are the type of products each segment wants, and then from a business sense, sort of figuring out for all of these different segments, how are we going to target them, how are we going to make sure they stay. I love that they're able to give you a sort of email coupon when they are, when you are just out of stock, right? That's the best time, when, you are about to buy. They understand you really well. If you are a first-time customer, it probably should have been a little bit different. At that point, it's introducing you to more products. It's being able to give you a lot more free product when you're sort of getting your first package, right? So that entire experience is powered extremely fundamentally with data. So that's the sort of second big use case for companies to think about in terms of engaging with their customers, so keeping the customers, sort of figuring out segments, lifetime value. And the third side of it is on the supply chain side of it. How do we ensure that we are producing enough product, that the entire process is optimized, we don't run out of stock? If you're in physical places, how do you make sure that, the shops which are selling always have enough product? We're not wasting product and sort of providing it to sort of shops which are not very good at sort of clearing this, right? So optimizing supply chain becomes extremely important as you start to scale up the business. And at some point, when those Excel sheets and that poor analyst at the end of the month who has to go and figure out supply chain and ordering and inventory, when you start encountering issues in that, when that no longer works, that's the right time to sort of focus on the supply chain side.
That makes sense. And I love that you broke it up into three three groups or the three use cases, really, how do you tie those three together? Because obviously they have to speak to each other somehow, right? You don't want to be ordering a ton of inventory if your sales are dropping.
Yep. Yeah, and that's a very tricky question, right? Because as you scale, splitting up your business into different business units is naturally the way you grow, right? When you're a 5-person company, you're a 50-person company, you can't have everything centralized if you're a 50-person company. So it's important as you scale up, and all of these conversations are only sort of start becoming relevant when you're no longer a 5-person company, right? When you're a bigger company, when you want to get more specific into go-to-market, when you want to get more specific into supply chain, when you want to get more specific into customer engagement. If you're smaller, the fact that you're a smaller company, you have a good lens on business is going up. Let's order more inventory. These customers are ordering a lot. Let's make sure they don't leave, right? It's very kind of intuitive. It stops becoming intuitive once you hit a certain size point. And that's when you are, focusing more on investing in these capabilities such that people in the go-to-market side have one-stop shop to be able to answer any questions they want to, right? Fundamentally, this sort of companies which can answer any of these questions in seconds versus have to wait 1 week to produce this data, which one do you think are going to be able to be more aligned? So what starts to happen is as an organization scales, people start to get less aligned because one person can no longer wear multiple hats. So that's a natural cost of growing, is efficiency per person and alignment decreases. Now, having these capabilities and having everyone in the company answer these questions holistically, self-service in seconds, all of a sudden, it's easy for the marketing person to sort of figure out, hey, looks like our warehouse production has really suffered. Now, what that means is this is probably not the right time to go spend $500,000 and sort of run that new Black Friday deal, right? So,
right.
Number one, it becomes easier to access information across different departments. And then as you have core metrics, each department has the kind of core metrics. You have inter-department sort of meetings to kind of figure out what is your interface with that next department. Like for marketing, it's historically been sales, right? The end result of marketing is to drive more sales. So if that interaction there doesn't happen, then there's a sort of problem. As you split out into different departments, you need to make sure you have that feedback loop. And for sales, that feedback loop is with supply chain, because as sales are going up, supply chain needs to kind of know sort of ahead of time, what are you predicting sales to be in the next 2 months, so they can kind of be extremely extremely sort of prepared for that. So that's kind of as you start sort of scaling up, when when a single person doesn't have the visibility end to end across the business, because the business is more complicated, that's how data starts to enable these micro conversations and align the business on the high level metrics. And I'm sure you're familiar with metrics like OKRs, which objective and key results, John Dewar's book on each department having their objectives and key results. And this starts top down, right? So what is the highest level company objective? And then the key results of at the highest level become objectives at every department level. And sort of that's how it trickles down, and that's how you sort of build that alignment in the organization. And the sort of data process works really well with the idea of planning and OKRs, and they both kind of work hand in hand. And if you do that exercise correctly, then every department should be aligned, because they all are fundamentally powering your highest level company objective. We can use an example that if the highest level company objective is to increase sales by 50%, now supply chain needs to plan for that 50%, which means produce 50% more inventory. I'm oversimplifying, but that's the supply chain objective. On the marketing side, hey, if we need 50% more sales, we need to have double the amount of leads to actually be able to eventually get to 50% more sales. And for the product team, it's like, okay, I think marketing is going to be able to increase sales by 30%. So we need to increase our average order value size by 10%. We need to decrease churn by 10%. So collectively, this is going to power that 50%. And then sales on that side, what is sales doing in order to, make sure to hit those numbers, right? So it kind of starts top level and aligns. Now, as that's a very idealistic way of doing things, but life comes in the way, right? And different things kind of happen. And it's kind of at that point, having the awareness to be like, hey, if marketing is not going to hit its 30%, then, what is that feedback to, what is the new estimate? And how should supply chain change track of not producing 50% more, but actually decreasing that number down to 20% more? And that's how you stay extremely aligned as your organization grows.
Yeah, and I mean, for any leaders out there that aren't familiar with OKRs, Google is famous for using OKRs within their teams and leadership. And there's tons of examples and case studies. I think there's even sites out there that will help you build your OKRs. Actually,
yeah. I think there's a one-up video which you can see on YouTube, which is how Google does OKRs, which I think John Doerr, the guy who sort of made them popular, I think they were invented by Andy Grove at Intel, and John was his intern at that point. And later on, when Google was starting to become Google, he met with the founders and presented the OKR strategy. And once Google adopted it, it became pretty commonplace in the Valley, and every tech company kind of uses them. And I think John's also written a book called Measure What Matters, which is a great book on just sort of learning more on how to do OKRs, but many, many, many sort of resources out there now.
Yeah, tons of them. And now as companies and particularly companies that are scaling up or building out, let's say OKRs and building out these different teams and strategies, where does data fall into this? Is this something where leadership should be establishing what data needs to be collected, or does every team that has their own OKR or leader that has their own OKR for their team should be really saying like, hey, this is going to be, these are the signals that say that we're going to be hitting this 30%, key metric for marketing, for example?
I'm losing you for a second. I lost the last 10 seconds, but what I got is, should leadership figure out what needs to be collected, or the teams kind of sort of go figure that out themselves?
Essentially.
Is that what you asked?
Basically.
I lost you again, but I'm just going to go with it.
Let's go with it.
So, I think the idea of let's collect every possible piece of information and then we later sort of find out how to use it is a very, very bad strategy, right? It's not so much, not having context on how information is used beforehand does not lead to, you can collect information, but if you don't know how it's going to be used, you might be collecting it at the wrong cadence. So I think in this world where every department has their OKRs, the OKR sort of philosophy says you can only have a key objective if you can measure it. And that's a forcing function for the organization to be like, if it's going to be a key result, we need to be able to measure it. If we're not being able to measure it, it's not an OKR. So what that does is, helps you figure out if something is important, then, step one of before saying we're going to improve it is figuring out how to measure it. And that's kind of done at the department level, right? At the high level, okay, these are objectives, we know how to measure them. Now these key results become objectives to a different, sort of one level down. And as they use that key result to become the objective, they have their own key results. And what becomes very important is, are they able to measure those key results? And if they're not, they need to go find a way to go do that. So, I think the natural framework in general accounts for each different level of the stack of the organization being able to figure out where they want to go, and then making sure that they have that they're able to sort of set up the right processes, data collection, tracking, reporting, in order to be able to measure that.
And I think this can even go as far as to helping them set up their company organization structure as they're growing. It's really learning what is that next key result that I need and who can fulfill that, whether that's, let's say, a marketing specialist, whether that's let's get very granular to a, let's say, PPC specialist just for advertising on a certain marketplace. Now, what are some challenge, or I guess some of the key challenges that you're seeing growing companies face when they get into just data and data analytics, particularly in e-commerce? That is a conversation today.
Yeah. I think, as I kind of said at the beginning, right, we're at this point where a lot more companies realize it's important. And there's been this historic massive leap from using free tools to actually going and doing this holistically. And, a lot of companies, we speak to a bunch of e-commerce companies, and they're all at that stage of, hey, those free tools are no longer serving me, but how do we go and kind of execute the strategy ourselves? Because it's not easy to go, sign in a data warehouse, and you might have heard of Snowflake, which is, the sort of company which is IPO'd and it's blowing up in the data space, but then a different ingestion tool pulling this data from these different sources inside, and then reporting and analytics, and then building out these self-service sort of reports, right? So that's been the big challenge, and extremely bullish on platforms like 5X or other platforms which bundle the modern day data stack for you and be able to offer it to you as a single product, so that you can focus on using the stack to start getting value instead of having to go sign all these enterprise contracts, sort of figure out how to go stitch this together. So I think tools like this are going to make this process a lot easier and a lot more streamlined.
And so speaking about 5X, and since we have come to the end of our episode time, what kind of is the optimal sized business, or what does your ideal client look like for 5X?
Yeah. On the 5X side, what our goal is that 90% of companies don't need to go set up the stack themselves. They would much rather get access to the stack on day one and focus on adding business value instead of sort of figuring out how to go stitch this stack together, right? So we're extremely focused on your typical Series A company, either venture backed or a company which is past this point in their business where the sort of free tools serve them, and they want to move to this, and they want to now sort of look at data more holistically. We're at that perfect stage where we provide the entire platform plus engineers for you, so you can go execute your data strategy without worrying about how to hire engineers or how to go set up this platform. So we're extremely at that point where you have an option, you want to go execute a data strategy, and you're debating on how do you go execute it. That's the right time to engage with someone like 5X.
And where can they find more information about 5X?
We are where customers are. So we're obviously on social. Our website is 5x.co. Feel free to email me directly. It's Tarush at 5x.co. And yeah, we're always around to chat on, any sort of social platform you are, or, sort of directly.
Awesome. Well, Tarush, thank you so much for your time today. That
Thanks so much for having me.
Will be in the description. Thank you. We really appreciate it. And you've got to try coffee again. You're in like the country to get coffee, man. You've got to try it.
I think I have enough energy, but
I think soon. You do. But yeah, after today's conversation, I see that.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. It was sort of so great to be here, and I sort of loved your questions, and I hope your viewers got some value out of this.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for everybody who tuned in and is listening either live or on the audio. If you guys liked what you heard today, be sure to give us a like, comment with your thoughts, share with your friends, subscribe to the show, rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, and don't forget to turn on notifications on the YouTube channel. That way you'll never miss a conversation with leaders in supply chain and e-commerce like Tarush with 5X. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Oh.